Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie, which aired on Nickelodeon on November 24th, 2017. And honestly, the fact that this movie exists, any Hey Arnold fan can agree, it's nothing short of amazing. It really, truly is. The fact that we were supposed to get this movie in theaters, and then sadly it was canceled because Hey Arnold the movie, which was supposed to be a TV movie, they decided to release that in theaters, and then since it didn't do well in the box office, they then canceled Hey Arnold's the Jungle movie. For the longest time, it just seemed like that was it. But then, of course, so many fans wrote into Nickelodeon wanting this movie so badly, wanting that closure, wanting that resolution, because the last episode produced of the series, The Journal, ended on that huge cliffhanger with Arnold finding that map, and you hear it in his voice, "Grandma, Grandpa, you have to see this, I found a map." And there's that hope and that excitement in his voice, and yet then that's it. For the longest time, it seems like that was the end. But oh my god, the fact that this movie aired already 2 years ago, and oh my goodness, reliving it now, I've just so many emotions I experienced rewatching this now. This was actually my third time watching this movie. So I watched it, of course, the night it aired, and then I watched it a few weeks later with my sister. So if you haven't seen this movie since it aired, I definitely highly recommend watching it again. It's so much fun to revisit, and oh my goodness. And the power of nostalgia, what can I say? Again, I've experienced all this, like many of the same emotions I felt that night watching it for the very first time. I was grinning ear to ear, I was holding my breath, I cried, tearing up, oh my goodness. Truly amazing, the power of storytelling and the love for these characters, for the world of Hey Arnold. Props, of course, to Craig Bartlett and the writers and how they got old and new people to, like, original people who worked on the series, and then many new artists who themselves grew up watching the show. That's absolutely incredible. And I remember, too, when it was first announced that this movie was greenlit. I remember the exact date, too. It was November 23rd, 2015. And when I first read the article, like, just seeing it, my jaw dropped. And then I just knew right away. I was like, oh my god, the Jungle movie, it's happening. And then we got that confirmation in March 2016 that Nickelodeon had greenlit a 2-part, 2-hour TV movie, and it was none other than the Jungle movie. And it was just such an incredible thing that these fans, all these years writing in, and then it had long since paid off, even though it took a long time. It was supposed to be 2002 since The Journal aired, and then 2017, and then it was absolutely, totally 100% worth the wait. For me personally, it completely exceeded every single one of my expectations, and the anticipation for this movie, nothing else can compare to me. At times I felt like a little kid again. At times, I swear, like feeling like an 11-year-old, which I was 11 when Hey Arnold the movie aired. And if you listened to me talk about Hey Arnold back in October, you would know that I was not a fan of Hey Arnold the movie because I was mostly extremely disappointed about the whole Arnold and Helga situation. So, of course, my inner fangirl, I was just so eager to see that resolution. But of course, the biggest question, too, of Arnold finding his parents. And I love that through line throughout this movie, that Arnold has a hole in his heart. That's just so heartbreaking and so touching, and all the more rewarding with the payoff. And every little detail along the way leading up to the airing of the movie just got me more and more excited when just new little details would trickle in here and there. Like when they were saying how a lot of the original voice actors would be returning, and then when we first saw concept art in 2016, and then the following year when they dropped the trailer at San Diego Comic-Con, and another one at New York Comic-Con, and just all the details, and then just I kept getting more and more excited. It was just, oh my goodness, I'm reliving all of that right now, if you can hear it in my voice clearly. Truly incredible. Like, my love for Hey Arnold is, wow. Love this show so much. Love these characters, as obviously every fan can say why we love this show so much, because it's so poignant and brilliant and moving and incredible. But I was so excited too to find out that many of the original voice actors were returning. Of course, like, no one else could be Helga G. Pataki than Francesca Marie Smith, so that was so amazing. She was able to reprise the role, and many of the other characters, like Andy McAfee as Phoebe, and Dan Castellaneta as Grandpa Phil again, and Tress MacNeille as Grandma Gertie, and Maurice LaMarche as Big Bob, just all those returning voice actors, and how it feels like no time has passed, even though everyone's older, because with the kids in particular, how they were kids at the time with the series, and then now, though, it's just like growing up with the characters, just truly amazing. And obviously the new voice actors with Mason Vale Cotton as Arnold and Benjamin Flores Jr. as Gerald, they absolutely crushed it. They were totally amazing as the new versions of Arnold and Gerald. And even the animation too. I was a fan of the new art style right off the bat too. I was like, oh, it's an updated look, like similar yet updated. It's cool. I'm here for it. I love it. I liked the little detail of, like, with Arnold's shirt, how you can clearly see it's a shirt, like, you know, oh my goodness, all that stuff. It's funny that they're supposed to be a year older, and yet they kind of look younger in a way because of the big eyes and everything. That's funny. I don't see the point of why they're a year older, though, but that's just a little nitpick. Because they still had they still had Mr. Simmons as their teacher, even though they're in 5th grade now. And it's not perfect, though, story-wise. I mean, because even when I watched it the first time, there were things here and there that I was like, well, alright, I mean, it works for the sake of the plot, but... So I still feel that way, but just my emotions watching this movie, there were a couple points I remember the first time watching where I just stopped and told myself, you are watching Hey Arnold's The Jungle Movie. This is it. It is here. It is really happening. So just like that alone, that excitement, that amazement that this is here, we're watching it, and the nostalgia, and yet it's just obviously that resolution that Craig Bartlett has always wanted to tell about what happens to Arnold's parents. So I'm so grateful, like, just all of us fans were obviously so grateful that they finally got to make the movie, and you can feel that gratitude that this is truly a movie for Hey Arnold fans. Like, for a new generation too, but especially for the fans. And it's so cool too how they got people who worked on the series to work on this movie, and then new people who grew up watching it, Hey Arnold themselves working on it. So a nice blend of new and old, even with the writers of the film. Of course, Craig Bartlett, and then the other writers are Joe Purdy, who also worked on the series, and then 2 new writers, Laura Sreebny and Justin Charlebois. So that's really awesome. And then this is co-directed by Rami Musquez and Stu Livingston. And then, of course, returning Jim Lang as a series composer. Another thing, you couldn't have this without Jim Lang's music. It captures so many important tonalities of the show, the melancholy, just so many important moments. That's just such a part of what makes this show so special. And I love how when he's just that dream sequence in the beginning of him searching for his parents. So that's one part right away where I told myself, you're watching The Jungle Movie, here it is. Oh my God. And I was grinning ear to ear that first time watching. And then again, watching it now, I was grinning ear to ear. I'm like, oh my goodness, I love this. I love Hey Arnold. And just all little subtle nods that really only longtime fans would even notice and appreciate. Like when Arnold is looking through that cave, and then he's got the flashlight, and it's like a parallel with the theme song. Stuff like that. It's just so clever. And then when he sees his parents, though, and then it's clever, too, that it's just shadows, that he doesn't see their faces in the dream. And then they're like, oh, one more mission with Eduardo. And then seeing the borders again. And there's a lot of great humor in this movie, too. That's why I love rewatching things when I hadn't seen it in a while, and then not remembering every little detail, of course. So then it feels like watching it for the first time. Like, I forgot the detail, like the little gag of Arnold feeding Abner bacon, which is just, like, as Mr. Wynn says, that's creepy. That's, like cannibalism. And then just all kind of, like, going through the hits, quote unquote, of Hey Arnold in a way. Like the typical gags that we know and love from the series, like when he walks out and then all the animals run out, that kind of stuff. Masonville Cotton, props to him. He did so well as Arnold, capturing just like that vulnerability and like that kind of like that shyness. Like I really liked his interpretation and his portrayal of Arnold, and how the character of Arnold himself has evolved in a way, and yet he still has that naivety to him since they are kids. So it's just so much to appreciate about this movie, my goodness. Something else I appreciate too, and then because I'm remembering so much watching it for the first time, so then of course like watching it now, that I loved watching was because something that we didn't see in the series. So it's like a sign of just that this movie knows its audience, like knows that it's for the fans in particular, that something I'm building it up, that the subtle thing of like when Helga and Arnold bump into each other, that classic moment, and then she's like, oh, where do you think you're doing? Whatever, she's like screaming at him, like, watch where you're going, football head, and then he's just like, like he's like kind of smirking, like he already knows. I like that little thing throughout this movie here and there. Like even later on when Helga's trying to convince Gerald to help her out to find all that footage of Arnold so that they can win the contest. And then he's saying like, well, I thought you hate Arnold. Why do you want to help him? And she's like, well, whatever. This is important to him. And then Gerald and Phoebe share a sly look. It's like, oh, we know. So what I'm getting at with all of that is that I like how it's like everyone knows that Helga loves Arnold, and like she's still keeping up this facade. So it's just like a subtle thing that we all know, we the audience know. It's just like a subtle thing, like just a gentle, sly, smirking looks, all-knowing glances that we all know Helga. It's okay, you don't need to put up such a defense, but of course it's Helga, it's who she is. And even with Helga too, just how since Francesca Marie Smith, again, like with all the voice actors, when she grew up with the character, as she's said, as they all have, growing up with their characters. So as a kid, and then now, since as she's an adult, voicing the character again, and she does sound more mature, but it still is Helga. Like, to me, it didn't really, watching it now too, it didn't really feel like much of a difference. Like, no one else could play Helga the way she does, obviously, so it's just amazing, like, hearing her again. Just, again, capturing all that brusqueness, and yet the true gentle side of Helga with her, like her little sighs, and then her classic when she pulls out the locket. And what's interesting too is how the locket is the season 1 style Arnold. And that's something, now that I'm saying that, something I didn't really talk about when I discussed Hey Arnold, that the art style really, really evolved with each season in this show, as much as like when Arnold's got a new voice actor each season pretty much after the kids would grow up, obviously, and then go through puberty, so they'd have to get a new person to play Arnold. So Arnold really went through the most change in that regard, and each voice actor brought something different to the role, like these different characteristics to Arnold. But even with how the art style changed, where it was kind of got more fleshed out, and then obviously when it went from like all of these old cartoons, like late 90s, early 2000s cartoons, when they went from traditional cell animation to digital ink and paint animation. So seeing this updated art style too, and just like all this fluidity to it. And I know also Craig Bartlett had said that they started from scratch basically because he had first been writing a script years ago. So he even just abandoned that, however many drafts he had written of that, and just started over. So obviously plot-wise things were different, but to me, this was all meant to be, that having this version of Hey Arnold's the Jungle movie, having this new look and just all these new updates. Like, it was meant to be to wait this long. It just was to have us as kids, since we were kids watching the show, and now we're all, like me, I'm in my late 20s, adults now watching it, just to appreciate it all the more. So I'm kind of gushing and rambling. I hope you're bearing with me. I just go through reliving all these emotions again, as I've said, watching this movie. And that through line, though, is just so powerful, too, that Arnold has a hole in his heart. Like, even when, with his dream, like the literal hole in his heart, and then when he wakes up, and then when he goes on his long, sad walk, all like the little meta things. And then when Grandpa's saying, oh, that was a long, sad walk, that's just cute too. And then that whole great part when everyone works together to make that video for Arnold, saying the legend of Arnold and all of the kinds things he did for so many people in the neighborhood. And that was such a clever, organic way of bringing back just like all the cameos of all of the characters of Hey Arnold. And then when he's getting all teary-eyed, that's so cute too. And like the legend of Arnold, Kid Generation with Sid. So I remember when that clip was released too, I watched it so many times and I was like, oh my goodness, I can't help it. I just love it so much. And my like excitement skyrocketed. Like any doubts I had about, oh, the new voice actor is going to be anything stupid like that, I was like, wow, they're all amazing. And then hearing Francesca Marie Smith again as Helga, I was just like so excited. And that part when Arnold touches Helga's shoulder and she gets like the static electricity and she does her little like, oh my goodness, and she just runs off. I have to go wash my socks. I forgot that joke. I was like, oh god, that's so funny. And it's funny too that it really showed us an even crazier level of Helga's obsession with Arnold, that she has this catalog of all these tapes and that showing all those moments throughout the series that apparently she was taping the whole time. That's just crazy. Like him saving Lockjaw, all that stuff. It's just, man, that's so funny that the whole class just worked together to make that tape. And then, of course, as we know, it's because it all seems too good to be true. Like when even Gerald says that, it almost seems like this contest was designed for you, that he can go to San Lorenzo where his parents have been lost and he wants to go find his parents. And then there's that brooding thing with Arnold's grandparents, how they're worried, and Phil cautions him that it's just a field trip, not to go off trying to find your parents. And that gag, too, is great when he hands him the passport, and I'll write your name as it's on your birth certificate, Arnold Shortman. So confirming once and for all that that's Arnold's last name, Shortman. That was a cute little nod to, or recognition to the audience. And then Arnold's always so honest and, like, because his grandpa told him, you promise you won't go find your parents, and then he says, well, you can go look for Eduardo. So, like, Arnold just, so it's like, no, I promised my grandpa I can't go looking for my parents. Like, what an amazing kid he is. I've said this already when I discussed Hey Arnold, but I'll say it again because it's worth repeating. We need more Arnolds in the world. We need more pure of heart, honest, noble, and good people who bring out the best in everyone and who are so selfless and giving and kind, and just Arnold is just all the best qualities of his parents, and his parents themselves are amazing people. And then of course when they go to San Lorenzo, and then Abner just sneaks on the plane with them. And then when they meet who we're led to believe is Eduardo, Arnold's parents' longtime friends, their good friend. And then, of course, we later find out that it's La Sombra himself, and he wants the Corazon because Arnold is the only... Which, that makes no sense to me, too. Why is Arnold the only one who can open that box for the Corazon? Because he's the pure of heart. I get that. I get the symbolism of it. It's just, why can't anyone just use that tool that Arnold used to have opened it? But it's sad, though, that... that La Sombra, he really is such a truly vile, cruel, greedy villain that he's manipulating Arnold's, like luring him here with that whole fake contest in the first place, and manipulating his emotions because of his missing parents, and it's terrible, and that he's pretending to be Eduardo, which is a man that Arnold's parents have always trusted. So that's just so terrible. And then when he tricks them all and they're in the prison then. And then I know there's that whole, I can talk about things that I wasn't crazy about. I tend to not be, in general, on this podcast. I tend to only focus on the things I love and my praise for everything. But I am critical here and there because obviously, nothing's perfect in storytelling in general. There's flaws, and sometimes when there's plot holes and things like that. But in this case, with this movie, which I still feel this way. I felt this when we first watching this movie 2 years ago and rewatching it now, that when Helga goes up in that crow's nest when they're on the boat to confess her feelings again to Arnold, because she had decided, like, oh wait, I'll help him find his parents, then he'll be so overcome with gratitude, because she's still frustrated with the whole thing when she confessed her feelings in Hey Arnold the movie. It alludes to that. So then when she confesses her feelings again, and it's like, of course she picks the worst possible moment. Like, why is she, like, pouring her guts out to him again when she already has? And, like, you would think she'd be like, okay, let him find his parents. I mean, because I understand this is all part of the tension, adds to the conflict. I get that, but it's just like, why, Helga? Come on, Helga, like, of course, leave him alone. He needs to find his parents. It's not that he doesn't, he's not exactly focused on that right now. But she's like, oh, a confession? Like, she's getting so excited, like, Helga, oh my goodness. So then, when she just, afterwards, when, like, he's like, oh no, there's a boat, and, like, she screams at the top of her lungs. That's always, that's classic Helga. But then, when she's just fed up then, and then she takes the picture out of her locket, rips it up, throws the locket into the river, throws all the pieces of the picture, and then we see Brainy when he just had seen her, and he just dives into the river to go, like, Brainy, he's incredible too, Brainy, but when he goes in. But, so what I'm getting at is that, to me, it's like, why did she do that? Like, it didn't feel like enough of a reason for her to just, like, give up that. Like, that she was so fed up, like, oh, that's it, I'm throwing away this picture of Arnold. I'm throwing away her locket that she loves and cherishes. So I still feel that way. That, like, just because he didn't even give her an answer, because, of course, he's got other things on his mind. He wants to find his parents, and then they were in danger. And so it's just like, why did she do that? It just didn't feel like enough of a reason for her to just, seemed like she was just giving up everything. Like, that's it. Even though obviously that's just her fed up in the moment. But I still just don't see, like, it just didn't have as much weight to me, that moment. But what I did like about it, though, was that I still, like, I love this moment. Then the payoff, though, I love later on when then she's in that cell, and she's like, when she sees him when he's holding up the picture of his mom and dad, and he's saying, like, I guess I'll never find you, that's so heartbreaking. And then she's like, oh, Arnold, if ever you've needed my love, it's now. And then when she goes to take out her locket and her pupils shrink in terror, I loved that moment so much, just capturing, like, her fear and, like, oh my god, what have I done? And apparently Craig Bartlett had said that they considered having, like, a flashback of her throwing the locket in the river, but then instead they just went with the black background of just Helga with her face dropped. And to me, that was just so much more effective and powerful, and really captured her moment of, oh no. So then, when Brainy just holds the locket out to her, like, Helga, and he holds it up to her, that was just, I loved that so much. And then she's like, Brainy, I can hit you, and she kisses him. I loved that. That was just so, like, like, finally Brainy got a victory, and then he breaks out the pan flute. That was just great. But also, too, similarly, with how Helga got fed up, and I just was like, all right, well, whatever. Similarly, when Gerald got annoyed with Arnold, that was, like, to me, it didn't feel like enough of a reason for him to get mad at Arnold. That it's not Arnold's fault. He got tricked by La Sombra, and he was, like, mad at him. It's like, oh, we don't keep secrets from each other. But he should have known that, obviously, I mean, that Arnold just wants to find his parents, so you think just a little more compassion. But again, then they make up, that's all fine. But that, too, I was like, all right, like, Gerald, you don't need to be mad at Arnold. Like, just try to see things from his point of view, that he didn't want this to happen, them to get obviously captured, and then they're in prison, they're in danger, and it's because La Sombra tricked them. So, just that kind of stuff, I was like, all right, that's, story-wise, I get it for the sake of the plot, but it just didn't feel like enough of a reason to me for that stuff in particular. But other stuff, too, like some of the humor and stuff, too, like with Harold, didn't really care for that, but it's just always great seeing, like, all the, like, Arnold's classmates, and Rhonda, again, so on point. Like, Olivia Hack, props to her, and props to Andy McAfee, props to all the voice actors. Andy McAfee as Phoebe, and Dan Butler again as Mr. Simmons. That part where Mr. Simmons goes insane, it's like, okay, class, and, like, when they're in that prison, and Mr. Simmons is like, oh, we're following the agenda, but then when he's just, like, insane then, and he's, like, teaching the class of monkeys, and there's signs around him saying, please don't hurt me, that was wild, oh my goodness. And of course, Curly taking so well to the jungle, And then a callback to when he's like, free all the animals. That was great too. And Nadine with her insects. I didn't really care for Eugene's thing when he's just blown up like he was Violet in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, like all blown up because of his allergies. Didn't really care for that kind of stuff. But, that's just little nitpicks. And also with Olga, there's clearly supposed to be more with Olga and Che, because Che was voiced by Lane Torren, the original voice of Arnold. So we didn't really get to see much of him. So I guess there was supposed to be like a whole little thing with them all vying for Olga's attention. So I kind of wish all along that this movie could have just been on Netflix so they could have made it as long as they wanted to, because this is just the strict hour 20 minutes to fit into that 2-hour time frame with commercials and everything. But, whatever, little nitpicks again, like I said. Well, another random thing I liked, though, because I didn't remember it at all, was at one point when Harold was crying, he's like, I miss Arnold. I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And Harold, too, with Justin Shankaro again, voicing him. I like that meta line, too, just speaking of Harold, with that Legend of Arnold video they made, and when he says, I was a one-dimensional bully before Arnold showed me my sensitive side. And I absolutely loved Phoebe in this movie. She was just the more confident, take-charge Phoebe when she helps those three escape, Arnold, Helga, and Gerald, so they can go find the green-eyed people and help Arnold find his parents once and for all. And then when Phoebe's distracting the guards and then using Rhonda's cell phone to, of course, Rhonda has to have her cell phone taking selfies and all that. That's typical. That's perfect for keeping up with the times now and how beepers are obsolete now and that kind of stuff. But I absolutely love the part when Phoebe says, see you on the other side, and then she gives Gerald a kiss on the cheek. Handsome. That was like, oh, bold Phoebe, I'm here for it. That was just, I loved that, and he blushed. So cute. Just that little moment between Gerald and Phoebe, just so sweet. And then Arnold, too, using his dad's journal to try to find the green-eyed people, and he has that glowing green necklace that Eduardo, I keep saying Eduardo because he's pretending to be Eduardo, that La Sombra had planted on Arnold to track him, to find him. It's like, oh yes, it was all part of my plan to have them break out. And then when they reach the green-eyed people, I like all the little stuff too, just as they're like all the booby traps and stuff. And then when Arnold's like, oh, booby trap, and then he just saves Helga, and he's like, oh, who said you could touch me? And then Gerald says, oh boy, like that too. I liked that too. Because he's like, oh gosh, like, can we just stop now playing games, I don't know. But I also liked when they find that statue of Arnold, and then Gerald's like, oh, this looks just like you. And then Helga says, oh, I've seen better. I think her with her shrines, of course, she's seen better. And then when they finally meet the green-eyed people, and that was interesting too, finding out that the green-eyed people are all children. So the whole thing with the sleeping sickness, which we learned about in the journal, and how Arnold's parents had to find a cure. So it's crazy too, though, that how La Sombra just is so pure evil. He just doesn't care about his crew at all. He just sacrifices his entire crew just because of his greed, just to find this Corazon. Just crazy. My God, how they just all die basically when all those traps. It's, oh my God, that's just insane thinking about it, but that just really ups the stakes. And that part when they're crossing the bridge, and then when the bridge falls and Arnold opens the box showing the gold Corazon, and then when they all end up dangling on the bridge. And I loved it watching it for that first time, that part when Arnold and Helga share that look and you see their eyes get really big, like their eyes shaking, and it's like in that moment everything they want to say that they can't say because they're thinking this is it. And then when Eduardo, the real Eduardo, finally, when he saves them. So I will say, I'm glad that, because this is something that had crossed my mind when I had first watched the journal, like as a kid, whatever, and then years later watching the journal. I'm glad that Eduardo didn't actually, that he wasn't bad. Like at one point I had thought that perhaps he was going to double cross them and be working with La Sombra or something like that. So I'm glad that wasn't the case, and that he actually is a true friend, and that really is just La Sombra who's the evil one, because that's something I was worried about. And that reminds me too of that when this movie aired, I watched Parents' Day and I watched the journal. So I mean, with this movie too, there was like violence and stuff, which is kind of crazy. Like just when they're all like jumping on the Sombra, and then like when he climbs back up, like oh my god, so eerie and really crazy. And then it's just chilling when he goes over the edge of the cliff, and then Eduardo says he died as he lived, full of poison. And then when they go back to the green-eyed people, and that leader, she's heartbroken because they needed the Corazon, and then it went over the cliff with La Sombra, so they're worried that they won't be able to cure the sleeping sickness. And that moment when Eduardo says she'll take you to, when he wants to know where his parents are, Arnold, and then he says she'll take you to where they lie. I remember I kind of gasped watching that the first time, and then seeing them, it was such a chilling and eerie image, seeing them lying there and thinking for a second, oh no, are they dead? Because apparently in earlier drafts, Craig Bartlett had said that his parents were dead, so I'm so glad he didn't go that route, because I honestly absolutely would have been devastated if that had been the case. It just would have kind of ruined it for me. It just would have not been the same. I'm like, thank goodness that wasn't the case. Because it just would have been so absolutely crushing, truly absolutely crushing, and kind of would have negated the whole thing with Arnold's blind optimism, as Helga says, and that he always believed someday he would find his parents. So, yes, that would have been realistic, that his parents had passed, but it just would have been so absolutely crushing and devastating. It would have just truly been, it would have made me feel like, oh, I wish this hadn't existed. I would have rather pretend that, being in Arnold's case, that someday just having the hope that he could find them. So I'm glad that wasn't the case, is my whole point. My whole long-winded way of saying that. I'm glad it makes more sense in this case that they're actually just in a coma. So just seeing them lie there and that they're holding hands, like that they just have been sleeping for the past decade, that he has to wake them up. And I love the moment too. It made me so happy, and I was just like, yes, you go, Helga, when she takes out her gold locket and offers it to Arnold. It was just such a brave move on her part. So powerful, and like just the look on his face, you just can't believe it. To me, with just like his shocked face, it kind of shows how it's sinking in for him that he means so much to her, that she has this locket of him. And then when he just goes to gently try to put it in, and then she's just like, oh, you're such a football head, and she just does it. Oh my gosh. And then when they wake up, you see the butterflies coming to life, and then the parents and the green-eyed people, the children all excited, reuniting with their parents, and then Arnold's saying, does that mean? And he just goes running, and then they wake up, and then of course the perfect thing they could say in that moment, just that gentle, loving, beautiful, perfect, hey Arnold, and they embrace, and I was crying. Oh my goodness, I was smiling and crying. I was like, oh my god, because I'm reliving it now. I was like so excited. I was clapping. I was like, yes, finally. Yes, this is what we've wanted all along. We've all wanted this. He reunited with his parents. Finally, finally, finally. Oh my goodness. And it was so worth it. It was so beautiful and moving and incredible. I loved that moment so much. It was just like the ultimate high. It was like what all of us Hey Arnold fans have wanted to see. And then, of course, the whole scene with Arnold and Helga, and then when she's trying to get the locket out, and oh my god. And then I was kind of like holding my breath. I was like, this is it. Oh my god, this is it. The Arnold and Helga scene we've been waiting for now. Because Craig Bartlett had said that the three biggest things in this movie: what's Arnold's last name, which we know that, how does Arnold feel about Helga, and will Arnold find his parents? So, as much as I was so eager to see Arnold reunite with his parents, I was admittedly more eager to finally see that resolution, some sort of resolution with Arnold and Helga, and how does he feel about her, and will he reciprocate her feelings, and will he acknowledge that he knew all along that deep down, even though she's mean, that it's only to cover up the fact that she loves him. So that entire scene to me was breathtaking and beautiful. I was kind of like clutching my hands to my chest. I was like, the build-up was so much. I just loved it. I felt like a kid again. I was like, this is what 11-year-old me has been waiting for. This final reciprocity. This final acknowledgement. This obviously not the end-all be-all of the relationship between Arnold and Helga, because they're going to have a very complicated relationship, obviously ups and downs and all that, but just that moment, just the true win for Helga. And even when she handed him the locket, when he says, I don't know, when she says, I don't know if it's pure, like pure gold, and he says, I don't know, I think your heart is more pure than you know. So that she's giving him her heart, literally the locket, and yet also figuratively giving him her heart, and that he has that hole in his heart, and that she's filling that, and it's just so beautiful. So all of that building up to this moment between them, when he gives her the locket back, and she's still like, oh, what locket? Like, still denying everything, typical Helga. And it's just so beautiful when he says, like, and you did all of this, you made all this happen, that you helped me not only go to San Lorenzo, but helped me find my parents and cure them, because it was her locket to cure them. And then he's just like, and he takes her hands. Everything about this was, again, perfect to me. Just whoever storyboarded this, just incredible, and everything about it. It was just so beautiful and breathtaking when he just, instead of just has his gratitude towards her, just overcome with emotion, and he takes her hands and he tilts his head up and waits for her when she just stares, and then she leans in, they both lean in and they kiss, and it was absolutely beautiful. And she lifts her foot, and then Gerald, now I've seen everything. I love that. Now I've seen everything. And they blush and immediately pull away, and Arnold's parents just snuggle up together. Oh my God, I loved that. So even now, though, I mean, it doesn't seem, they're young. That's the whole thing. They're still kids. So they have a very long way to go with their feelings. But we know Helga is hopelessly in love with Arnold. We know that Arnold knows, and that he recognizes that all along he sees the goodness in her, and he acknowledges, like, oh, but you're loyal and brave, and he admires what she's done for him. And so that's just one moment for them, one pure, beautiful, sweet moment of them sharing that kiss, and that someday it'll all work out. That they have a long way to go. That, it doesn't mean that they're together, and even if they were, that's a whole learning curve then, because I know that there's that whole part when he takes her hand, she's like, oh, who said you could touch me? Like, she's still like her typical brushing him off. So, like, it's still a return to the status quo after all that, but as Craig Bartlett has said, that Arnold and Helga are soulmates, and that they're destined to get married someday, have kids, as he said. So, just a true victory for the Arnold and Helga fans, I guess, but just for acknowledging the importance of that relationship throughout the show, and how Arnold recognizes how much Helga means to him. So then that bait and switch when he woke up, and for a few moments it seems like it was all just a dream. I know everyone just thinking like, oh no, please tell us that wasn't just a dream. But then when his parents walk in again, and it's just so sweet, and he's just so excited, and it's just so cute too how like they follow him. It's like, hey Arnold, can we follow you to school? We already miss you. Like, can we walk you to school? It's just so cute. Oh my goodness. And that final image of Arnold's parents, and then now it's that parallel that we saw in the beginning of the movie of their faces in shadows, and then now with them just sitting there on the stoop of the school and like waiting for him, and just that they're there waiting for him. So that was beautiful too. So it's just so incredible, again, reliving all of these emotions, watching this movie again, and just truly a gift for the fans, and you could tell the hard work put into it, and such a great payoff, and I just loved it so much. And another random thing I just wanted to say, though, that because it just stood out to me, I didn't notice it watching it the first time, but when you just hear Mr. Simmons, when they're all going to school, and you just hear Mr. Simmons say, I still have a job. That was funny. And then it's still the same thing with Big Bob and Miriam, though, and they're like, oh, Olga, oh, and the other one, oh yeah, Helga. Like, Helga's an afterthought, but that's all the same. But so in this moment, though, I'm completely contradicting myself when I discussed Hey Arnold. In this moment, I would absolutely love to see a season 6 of this show. I know Craig and the voice actors and the crew, they all want to do it. And I know that the ratings for this weren't that great, but all the fans loved it. It just wasn't what they wanted, Nickelodeon. But in this moment, I would love to see more of Arnold's parents and them getting reacclimated with the world, since they were in a coma for 10 years, and then them just relearning stuff and getting to finally be with Arnold. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see kind of how Arnold and Helga navigate their feelings, and are they going to try to be a couple, that kind of stuff. So still, we'll see, because again, though, I mean, this was the perfect conclusion, getting that closure after all these years. But I would love to see more stories with these characters. I really would. And even if we don't, though, that's perfectly fine. I'm satisfied with this ending for Hey Arnold, the series, that this is the perfect way to end it. But if we got more, I'm sure it would be amazing, though. And you never know, because now there is that deal with Netflix and Nickelodeon, that Nickelodeon, they're going to be producing new projects to air solely on Netflix, like projects new and old. And we already had, obviously, they ended up putting Rocko's Modern Life, Static Cling, and Invaders and Enter the Florpus on Netflix. And I watched Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie on Netflix, too. I was like, oh, well, it's also on Hulu, too. And I have the DVD, but I figured, I'll watch it on Netflix. Why not? And the movie was wonderful and beautiful. And it was so sweet how there was a dedication to the fans at the end in the credits, saying thank you to all the fans who wrote letters and petitions in support of this movie. So that's wonderful, too. Oh, I didn't mention... also the whole stuff with Abner, too, that was so funny, too, how he's, oinking at Grandpa Phil and Grandma Gertie, and Grandma Gertie's like, oh my gosh, wow, and then what happened? And then that one part when you see Abner in first class, and you see Craig Bartlett sitting next to him, that was just so funny, too. So all the little Easter eggs in this movie was just so much fun. Seeing Arnold reunite with his parents, what we wanted all along, and seeing Arnold recognize, or acknowledge, that someday, that he may not love Helga now, but someday, that he, you could tell that they just have that connection, and that she means more to him than even he realizes, but that he was just so grateful to her for all that she did for him, her true selflessness, she in her own way, pure of heart. So I love all that symbolism there, absolutely beautiful. Nothing but love and praise to Craig Bartlett and to the whole team who worked on this movie and who worked on Hey Arnold, the original series. So perhaps one day we'll see more, but even if we don't, that's okay, because this was just a perfect, lovely, beautiful conclusion. And with all of that being said, I have another Hey Arnold story to share. So the first one I shared is called Care. I shared that when I discussed Hey Arnold in October. And I was originally going to share another one I wrote called Fragile Moments, but that one is more serious, and I figured I wanted to do one that's kind of more fun. And so I have a few other Hey Arnold stories that I wrote, but the one I'm sharing in this episode is called Audaciously Flirting, and I wrote this shortly after it was confirmed that Hey Arnold was getting a TV movie, so shortly after that news, so it was back in 2015, and that was just when I went back. I was just so excited, and I just went on a Hey Arnold kick, and I was rewatching old episodes, and I was looking up interviews with Craig Bartlett and all of that, and I was just writing more Hey Arnold stories, so this was one of them, and rereading I was like, oh my god, this one's so much fun, I just have to share this one first. So here we go, without further ado, it's story time. Helga is in love with me. Helga is in love with me. Helga G. Pataki is in love with me. He'd lost count how many times he'd said it out loud, as if saying it out loud would somehow cause the words to make even the slightest bit of sense to him. If anything, it only did the opposite, regardless of any variation in the way he said it. Things had quickly returned to normal after that wild and life-risking adventure to save the neighborhood. As for things between him and Helga, he wished he could say the same. She'd been particularly eager to take back that entire outpouring of emotion, blaming it all on the lack of sleep and getting caught up in the heat of the moment. Granted, he'd been the one to give her the out in the first place, and he'd even welcomed the insults she'd immediately thrown at him before skipping off, as it only meant that equilibrium had faithfully been restored between them. It had been an unspoken agreement between them, to pretend like it had never happened. But that was the thing. It had happened, and try as he might, he simply couldn't forget about it. In hindsight, it was actually pretty obvious that the only reason Helga always teased him and called him names and acted so cruel towards him was to cover up the fact that she was hopelessly, ridiculously, completely, undeniably, insanely, wholeheartedly, head over heels in love with him. And now that it was out there, it seems that Helga had taken her cruelty towards him and kicked it into high gear. It was almost like she was going out of her way to top her mean streak by any means possible, so that he'd go back to thinking she really did hate him, even though they both knew otherwise. He thought getting even with her would have finally put an end to all the games, to the bully facade she'd so skillfully crafted and maintained throughout the years. But of course, the immature prank he'd wound up pulling on her had only backfired. He knew what he'd done was wrong, but it had only been an accident on his part. Helga was the one to conspire an evil plan to make him feel even guiltier about the whole thing, by carrying on like she'd gone permanently blind long after her eyesight had fully returned. Even after all was said and done, she'd still come out the victorious one. He had to admit there was something to admire about how clever she was. Even if she did use her craftiness for her own devious agenda, namely to humiliate and torment him. Still, it all seemed so ridiculous now. Why couldn't she drop the act and start being honest with him? That was the most frustrating thing about this entire weird situation he now found himself in with Helga. If she loved him so much, why'd she still have to go on putting up a front and acting like she hated him with every fiber of her being? Maybe it was partly his own doing, since he'd been the one to insist that she actually hated him. In all fairness, he really had thought it was what he'd wanted at first. However, after everything that had recently transpired between the two of them, he just couldn't see the logic in pretending anymore. He knew the truth now. They both knew it. They couldn't keep ignoring it. Of course, there were occasional glimpses in which her tough resolve would crumble and her true feelings for him would show. He saw it in the way her eyes would widen or her face would fall after she'd insult him or push him or yell at him or take it too far in hurting him. He would see the look of guilt flicker across her face like a strike of lightning, powerful and bright, but gone in that same flash. Those little moments of truth always managed to melt away any ill feelings Arnold occasionally had towards her, allowing him to remember that she really was a good person deep down. She may have been rough around the edges, but that kindness was within her. He knew it was there because he'd seen it on so many occasions in the past. All it would take was the right amount of coaxing for that hardened exterior of hers to finally break once and for all. As he stared up at the sky through his bedroom windows, he focused on the clouds passing by with a slow gust of wind. There was one cloud in particular that appeared to be taking on a unique shape. There was a circle, or a ball. It almost looked like a fist. And there was a head with two rectangular shapes on either side of it. They almost looked like pigtails. And there were a couple of triangular shapes, forming what seemed to be a bow. A pink bow. With a gasp, he tore his gaze from the sky. For a while he simply lay there on his bed and did nothing but try to calm down his rapid heartbeat that seemed so stubbornly unwilling to slow down. All because he couldn't stop thinking about Helga Pataki. When had that started happening? Ever since she confessed her feelings to you, Doy, a subconscious voice somewhere in the back of his mind said, one that sounded an awful lot like Helga herself. Arnold closed his eyes and sighed at length. Helga. What was he going to do? The only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't keep pretending as if things were the same between them, because frankly they weren't. The knowledge of how she really felt about him was taking over his every waking thought, making it impossible for him to concentrate on anything else. Something had to change. He had to get through to her somehow. He had to be honest with her. He had to make her understand how he felt, even if he wasn't exactly sure himself. And just when he thought all hope was lost, an idea suddenly sprang into his head. An idea so bold, so daring, it was just crazy enough to work. One side, moron, Helga said in her typical brusque fashion, pushing away a random pimple-faced geek as she stormed through the hallways of PS 118. She cast a look behind her at her best friend, who struggled to keep up as she carried a pile of books. Step on it, Phoebe. If I'm late to class one more time, I'm going to get slapped with a detention slip. Hurrying, Phoebe said in that always obedient tone of hers, even as her arms shook beneath the weight of all the books. Meanwhile, heading to class from another end of the hallway were Arnold and Gerald, the two of them having a casual morning chat about last night's homework. I'm telling you, Arnold, fractions are going to be the death of me, Gerald said. I spent over an hour figuring out those math problems last night. All that algebra is enough to drive a guy nuts. At least fractions aren't as bad as long division, Arnold said. There you go again, always looking on the bright side, Gerald said, unimpressed. I swear it really is starting to get old, man. And don't you dare say somebody has to. Well, somebody does, Arnold said, despite himself. Gerald heaved a sigh. Whatever you say, Arnold. As they passed the water fountain, Gerald paused to take a drink, while Arnold kept walking. He rounded the corner at the exact same moment as Helga, leaving the two of them to crash into each other and land hard on the ground. Helga groaned under her breath as she sat up. Her eyes went wide for a second as she gaped at Arnold, who had put a hand to his forehead, but she was quick to get a hold of herself. She lowered her brow and clenched her fists, unleashing her usual tirade. Criminy, how many times do I have to tell you to watch where you're going, you annoying little yellow-haired shrimp? She asked, fury burning in every single one of her words, even as she stood up and dusted herself off. I mean, really, are you that blind? What the heck is wrong with you? Learn how to walk already. The whole time Helga was yelling at him, Arnold was busy picking himself up from the ground and collecting the stray notebooks he'd dropped. After she finished, she glowered at him impatiently, clearly waiting for him to apologize to her, the way she always did. Little did she know he had quite a different response in mind for today. You're right, Arnold said, plainly enough to not incite any suspicions. At least, not yet anyway. I really should watch where I'm going. Helga only scoffed, totally unapologetic and uncaring. Without missing a step, she brushed past him. Arnold watched her for a few seconds, feeling a twitch in his heartbeat over what he was about to say, but at that point he knew it was now or never. Gathering his nerves, he let the words spill out of him. By the way, Helga, you look really cute today. Helga stopped short like the scratch of a record needle. Time itself seemed to stand still entirely. Even Gerald, who long since deserted the water fountain, was so taken aback by what he'd just heard that he didn't even notice Phoebe bumping into him. As for Helga, by the time she turned around to face Arnold, any trace of malice on her face was gone. What did you say? She asked, not even attempting to mask her astonishment. For what it was worth, Arnold managed to hold his composure, which surprised even himself. This time, though, he moved away from the nonchalant attitude by giving her a little grin. Well, actually, what I should say is, you look extra cute today. I've always liked that bow, you know. Helga looked up at the pink bow atop her head, as if she were discovering it herself for the very first time. She was silent, utterly and uncharacteristically silent, to the point where it was almost a little eerie. Whether she actually planned on saying something in response was unclear, because that was when the morning bell rang, loud and drawn out, putting an end to their exchange for the time being. I guess I'll see you in class, Arnold said, finishing off his mysteriously bold remarks with a not-so-mysterious wink, which only made Helga's eyes pop. He immediately hurried off, but not without grabbing a still shocked-to-the-bones Gerald and dragging him away. After they were gone, Phoebe, who was just as stunned as anyone, found that she could do nothing but stand there, even with her arms feeling like they were about to give out with the weight of the books, even with the knowledge that she was now risking her own untarnished record of never once being late to class the longer she stood there. In that moment, none of that mattered to her, and in fact, the only concern was for her best friend, who appeared to be literally frozen in place. "Helga?" she asked quietly so as not to startle her. "Are you all right?" The girl in question snapped to look at Phoebe so abruptly she flinched. "Conference," she said, "now." "But Helga—" Any feeble form of protest that was about to come out of Phoebe's mouth was cut short as Helga grabbed her by the arm and jerked her down the hallway, the stack of textbooks tumbling to the ground along the way. "Hold up a second, Casanova," Gerald said, shaking himself out of his best friend's grasp before he could pull them into their fourth-grade classroom. He crossed his arms as he asked, "You want to tell me what the heck you think you were doing back there?" "What do you mean?" Arnold asked, purposely playing dumb. He could tell Gerald was in no mood to play games, though, as his patience was running thin. "Come on, man. Did you actually say what I think you said?" "You mean about Helga? Yes, about Helga? Is there something going on between you two? Arnold hesitated. The truth of the matter was, he had no idea how to even begin to answer that question, mostly because he didn't know himself what was actually going on between him and Helga, and so he took the easy way out. We have to get to class, he said. Gerald said knowingly, and with that he dropped the subject and followed Arnold inside without another word. You told him? Yes, Phoebe, I told him. I opened my big, stupid mouth and poured my guts out to him. I told him everything, Helga said. She paced about the cramped space of the janitor's closet, clutching a broom. I told him about the poems, the shrines, the stalking, and then I grabbed him and I... She paused, squeezing the handle of the broom with such strength she could probably snap it in two if she really tried. With a sigh, she confessed, I kissed him. You kissed him? Yeah, that's right. I gave him a long, passionate smooch because I'm the biggest idiot on the whole stinkin' planet, Helga said, gritting her teeth as she chucked the broom back at the wall. And sure, things were fine between us for a while, but now it's like he's mocking me or something. You heard him back there. He called me... Her breath caught in her throat, as though her lungs were holding the air hostage for a frightening second. She vigorously shook her head. He couldn't have actually meant what he said just now, could he have, Phoebe? Gosh, Helga, I truly wish I could provide some sort of keen insight on this rather shocking turn of events, but I'm afraid I'm just as perplexed as you are, Phoebe said. Perhaps you need to take a moment and look at this from his perspective. He could simply be trying to get you to... Get me to what? Helga demanded. Oh dear, how do I put this? Phoebe said, bringing up her hands and wringing them together as she pondered the best way to phrase her next words. He could be trying to get you to... soften up a bit, so to speak. Soften up? Helga said, and she only let out a haughty scoff. Get real, Phoebe. I'll tell you exactly what he's doing. He's toying with my affections. That's what he's doing. Well, let me tell you something. Helga G. Pataki is no sucker. If he wants to mess with me, you can bet your butt I'll be more than happy to mess with him right back. I'll mess with him so good by the time I'm through with him, the little punk won't even know what hit him. She cackled wildly with the ardor of a mad scientist about to awaken her latest creation. It scared Phoebe to no end, especially with the knowledge that there was nothing she could do or say to stop her. It grew all the more unsettling when Helga's laughter abruptly ceased, and she looked at Phoebe with a deadpan expression as she motioned to the door. After you, Phoebes. The school day carried on as normal. Helga threw a few dozen or so spitballs at Arnold for good measure, and she made sure to give him her trademark scowl every time he turned around to look at her. Of course, being the ingenious schemer that she was, Helga knew she had to wait for the perfect moment to strike back at him, so she did, all the way until lunchtime. Arnold was carrying a tray of cafeteria food to go sit down at one of the tables when Helga jumped in front of him, jolting him to a stop. Hiya, Arnaldo, she said in an unusually chipper tone. Oh, Arnold said. Hey, Helga. Listen, about this morning, I should probably explain myself. No need, Helga said, holding up a hand. I already know why you said all that crazy stuff you said to me this morning. And I gotta say, I find it pretty darn flattering. You do? Of course. Heck, I should have known it would only be a matter of time before you'd go all gaga over me. Wait, what? Oh, don't start getting all modest on me now, lover boy, Helga said, her eyelids drooping as she stepped closer to him. Besides, now that I know how you really feel, it gives me all the courage I need to do something like, I don't know, say this. She grabbed him by the shoulders and inhaled the fresh-smelling scent of his hair. Ah, delicious. With a satisfied smirk, she released him and walked away, feeling a renewed sense of confidence, despite all the murmurs she could distinctly hear swirling all around her. Helga basked in the glory of her victory all the way through recess, but unfortunately it all came crumbling down by the time recess was over. When the bell rang, the kids all reluctantly left the playground to head back inside. Helga did the same, only to freeze when she saw Arnold standing there, holding the door open for her. More whispers broke out among their classmates. This time Helga even heard someone go, ooh. All this attention made the back of her neck prickle with heat, and yet all she could do was stand there like some sort of infatuated idiot as she stared into the eyes of her beloved, who patiently waited for her to walk through the door. Why is he doing this to me? I can't take much more of this. He's driving me crazy. That does it. This calls for drastic measures. There's no way I'm going to let him win this weird, stupid, confusing little game between us. Her face hardened into a look of unforgiving determination as she walked through the school doors. She narrowed her eyes at Arnold in a cold, menacing snarl, as if to say, "Just you wait, buddy boy." Arnold couldn't get Helga's terrifying look of pure evil out of his head. He was on edge, holding a pencil between his hands and twirling it with the speed of a mini race car. He was beginning to think that attempting to be nicer than usual to Helga probably wasn't the best idea after all. A little late with that revelation, Einstein, the subconscious Helga-sounding voice mocked in the back of his head. "Okay, class, now before we jump into today's reading lesson, I wanted to know if there's anyone who'd like to share their latest poetry assignment with the class," Mr. Simmons said. Among all the eye rolls and groans he received in return, he only smiled. "Come on now, there's no need to be shy. Poetry is a beautiful form of art to express the inner depths of one's soul." Helga's hand shot up. "I'll read mine, Mr. Simmons." "Oh," he said, pleasantly surprised. "Really? That's wonderful, Helga. But I've always thought you preferred to remain anonymous," Helga said as she got up from her seat with her poem and walked to the front of the class. "Nah, not this time." She cleared her throat. "This one is dedicated to the one and only object of my deepest desires." She looked right at Arnold. He dropped his pencil. She cleared her throat and, with a calculating grin stretching wide across her face, she read her poem aloud. "Longing for the day you'll hold me in the warmth of your arms, to taste the sweetness of your tender lips once more, for me to call you forever mine and I forever yours. Longing for the day you'll finally look me in the eyes and say," and she looked Arnold square in the eyes as she finished, "I love you." Silence consumed the entire room, a silence so distinct Arnold worried people would be able to hear his heart banging against his ribcage like a pigeon wildly flapping its wings. It felt like an eternity had gone by before Mr. Simmons finally broke the deafening silence. "Oh my, Helga, that was beautiful." Harold's howling laughter cut him off. "What a dumb, girly love poem!" The rest of the class promptly joined in on the raucous laughter, all except for Phoebe and Gerald, as well as Arnold, who looked to be too shocked to do anything but sit there, his eyes unwillingly glued to Helga. She looked at him with the same serious, doe-eyed look she had that morning before it all came crashing down. Her eyes narrowed, her face darkened, her hands tightened, crumpling up her poem, and, with a furious growl, she went on the attack. She lunged at Harold, grabbing him by the shirt and yanking him so hard she managed to pull him out of his seat. "Say that again, pink boy," she said in a seething tone, and she brought up her fist. The laughter was replaced with gasps filling the room. Harold gulped. She tightened her fist, cracking her knuckles, ready to hit him, when Mr. Simmons intervened in a flurry. "Helga, please, let's take a second and relax," he said in as placating a manner he could manage amidst the escalating situation. "I may have been lenient about your tardiness this morning, but if there's one thing I do not tolerate, it's the threat of violence. I'm afraid I have no choice but to give you detention. Now please kindly release Harold and return to your seat." Helga looked from the increasingly nervous Mr. Simmons to the scared out of his wits Harold. With another growl, she shoved Harold back into his seat and headed back to her own desk, collapsing into it and sinking as far down as possible. As Mr. Simmons hesitantly began the reading lesson, Arnold found his concentration permanently derailed, and he couldn't help glancing at Helga every so often. She sat with her elbows folded on her desk and her chin resting against them, hiding most of her face. She only met his gaze once, and when she did, there was a look of sheer hurt in her eyes that he'd never seen from her before, like her spirit had been crushed. It brought a wave of sadness to his heart. When the school day was over, Arnold lingered by his locker, moving sluggishly, unable to shake the heartache from that afternoon. As he headed out, he was so preoccupied with his thoughts he wasn't paying attention to where he was going, and he collided into someone. He managed to find his balance at the last second, only to see the person he'd accidentally knocked to the ground. "Helga, are you okay?" Yeah, I'm fine," she said as she sat up and waved him off. "Don't worry about me." "Well, at least let me help you up." "I said I'm fine," she said so brashly he found himself too shaken to move now. She proceeded to stand up and speak so harshly it was obvious she was only covering up how emotionally defeated she was. "I don't need you to help me. I don't need you to be nice to me. I don't need anything from you, Arnold. Now why don't you do me a huge favor and get out of my sight? I've got detention." She walked away, but without the usual fire in her step. Arnold frowned. It was official. He'd broken Helga G. Pataki. Arnold sighed with the heaviness of a kid carrying the entire weight of the world on his shoulders. There was a knock at his door, and in walked his grandpa. "Oh boy," Phil said the moment he saw Arnold, sprawled across his bed and staring up at the sky yet again. "I knew something was wrong when you got home from school and headed straight up to your room without saying anything. It could only mean you're having another one of your complicated boyhood problems. What is it this time, short man?" "It's nothing, Grandpa," Arnold said, bringing up his hands and resting them over his stomach, which seemed to be endlessly twisting in knots. Phil said. He rubbed his chin as he observed his grandson and proceeded to skillfully tabulate his symptoms. "Let's see now. Wistful sigh, clutching your stomach, daydreaming more than usual. It's either indigestion or... Wait, don't tell me. Oh, I know. You're having girl problems again, aren't you? That mean girl with the pink dress and the pigtails and the one eyebrow?" "Helga," Arnold said automatically. "Yeah. I'd rather not go into any details, but basically things are really weird between us right now, and I don't know how to fix it." "Oh, Arnold," Phil said with a sympathetic shake of his head. "Look at you, suffering from all this girl trouble at only 9 years old. And the worst of it is, you ain't even seen nothing yet. Just wait till you hit puberty." "Grandpa," Arnold said in mourning. Okay, you're right. That's a conversation for another day," Phil said as he took a seat at the end of Arnold's bed. "Now listen, Arnold, I know you're a sensible kid, always thinking things through and doing the right thing. But sometimes you gotta stop thinking. You just gotta go with your gut, especially when it comes to women." Arnold met his grandpa's gaze, and his grandpa offered him a friendly smile. "I'll leave you alone to have your little epiphany," Phil said, and with that he got up and left, his smile turning a bit more mischievous as he shut the door behind him and descended the stairs. Poor kid, he's got a long and messy road ahead of him with that girl, and then before he knows it, he'll be marrying her. Helga sat alone in the classroom with her feet propped against her desk and her hands behind her head. Another pointless after-school detention. She didn't even care she was here. It was the least of her problems. She had far worse things to worry about, like the fact that her entire reputation was ruined. It was no secret her classmates thought she was a total joke now, all of them teasing her, making fun of her, and the worst of it all, that was all her own doing. No, come to think of it, this was all Arnold's doing. He was the one who started this whole thing with that cute comment he'd made this morning. He was the one screwing with her emotions. He was the one... "Helga?" "Arnold," she said with a jump, dropping her legs to the floor and her hands to her lap. "What the heck are you doing here?" Well, it's sort of hard to explain," Arnold said as he brought a hand to the back of his head. "Yeah, well, hop to it, hair boy, before Principal Warts comes back to keep an eye on me," Helga said, making air quotes. "What an idiot. The guy thinks he's so powerful, and I once caught him playing with little animal figurines he keeps stashed inside his desk." As she spoke, Arnold shut the door and strolled over to her. His eyes were on the ground now, and he was rubbing his hands together, which all piqued Helga's interest. "Well," she asked, "what's with you? You got something to say? Just spit it out." "I will, then do it." Arnold sighed. "Helga, we both know how you really feel about me," he said, to which Helga's heart stopped beating for a full second, though if her face indicated it, he didn't seem to notice, as he simply continued. "And I guess the real reason I was being extra nice to you today was because I thought I could get you to start being nicer to me, too. But then I realized that's not who you are, and you know what? I wouldn't want you to change, because you're really great the way you are. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want things to go back to the way they were before, without this weird tension between us. And I have an idea on how to do that, but only if you're totally okay with it." I'm listening," Helga said, her pulse rising in anticipation. Arnold took a deep breath. "Well, I was thinking, since you've kissed me, maybe now I could kiss you." Helga fell out of her seat. "Ow," she said, wincing in pain, only to stop when she felt a hand on her elbow. "Hands off the merchandise." "Sorry," Arnold said, holding up his hands. Helga maintained the perturbed look on her face as she climbed back into her seat. "So," she said in a matter-of-fact tone, despite feeling like she was about to pass out with her adrenaline in overdrive, "let me get this straight. You're saying you want me to go back to calling you names, tormenting you, the whole 9 yards, all so I can once again put up a front to make it seem like I'm not completely in love." She paused, the last few words getting stuck in her throat. "Well, you know. And then you'll go back to sort of ignoring me sometimes and basically pretending like you don't know how I really feel about you." She stopped again and switched gears. "And you think the best way to do all that is for you to kiss me?" Well, yes, Arnold said, but only if you want me to kiss you. Yes, Helga said, and Arnold blinked. She mentally kicked herself, willing herself to calm down. I mean, yeah, sure, I'd be okay with that. As long as you swear you'll be okay with me picking on you again, if that's really what you want. Yeah, I think it is, Arnold said. I mean, at least for now. After all, we are only in the 4th grade. We've got a long time to figure out our feelings for each other. Right now, I'd rather not have to worry about it so much, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or be ridiculed by our classmates. You don't deserve that. Because the truth is, I really do care about you, Helga. This was it. He meant that. Helga could feel it. No games right now, just honesty. Oh, my sweet love, how innocent you are. He wasn't ready for this yet, and if she were being completely honest, neither was she. He was right. They had plenty of time to figure this out, this crazy, screwy emotion called love. I care about you too, Helga said before she could lose her nerve, even if I don't always show it. I know, Arnold said, and he smiled warmly. Helga had to hold her breath to stop herself from letting out a long, trembling sigh, as her insides turned to mush and her heart sang. It wasn't long until the silence between them grew palpable, as did her impatience. Well, come on, she said. What are you waiting for? To grow a pair of antlers? Lay one on me already. Surprisingly, there was no hesitation from Arnold. He simply leaned down and kissed her. The moment his lips touched hers, time slowed down. It was a simple kiss, smooth and gentle, a stark contrast to the forceful and zealous kiss Helga had planted on him. But it was perfect nonetheless. She never wanted it to end. Getting caught up in the moment, Helga reached up with both hands and seized a handful of Arnold's shirt. He made a noise of surprise but didn't pull away, and in fact his hand came up of its own accord. She felt his fingertips lightly brush her cheek. A touch so fleeting and delicate it was likely unintentional. It made her heart do a somersault all the same. When they parted, their hands fell away, though their faces remained inches apart as they stared deeply at each other. Time resumed. The sound of distant traffic was the only backdrop to the otherwise complete silence between them. Simultaneously, they looked down to find Arnold's hand cupped over Helga's, and yet he didn't let go. So, are we okay? He asked. Helga could hardly breathe. This was single-handedly the greatest moment of her young life. She kept staring at Arnold's hand, perfectly resting on top of hers. It was so warm. She couldn't get over it. He was actually touching her of his own free will. Helga? She shook her head so hard she practically rattled her brain. You bet we're okay, she said with a smirk. She pulled her hand out of Arnold's grasp and slipped both of her hands behind her head once more, bringing her feet back up as well. Now quit hitting on me and get out of here before I make you wish you'd never been born, football head. Arnold grinned. Whatever you say, Helga. He left, and as soon as he closed the door, Helga brought her hands over her heart and finally released her high-pitched, fluttering sigh. Alright, so that was Audaciously Flirting. And I have to say, because was reading this now, that reminding me that I find Arnold a tricky character to write. And I mentioned that when I shared my other short story for Hey Arnold, that first one I shared, Care. In that one, I thought of, because with Arnold, all different voice actors, I thought of seasons 2 and 3 Arnold. So with this one, I thought more of, like, later season Arnold. Obviously, this takes place after Hey Arnold's the movie. So that kind of helped me in a way, like, thinking of which version of Arnold this is, which voice actor in that regard. But, yeah, I just had fun writing that, though, and just kind of how Arnold would deal with knowing how Helga feels about him. So I just had fun with that, though. So, again, I just love these characters so much, and love this series so much. And it's so close to my heart, and forever grateful that this movie exists. And you're a bold kid, Arnold. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com, or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I'm so excited to say that I will be welcoming a new guest on the show. I will be interviewing David Stephen Cohen. He is the head writer of Courage the Cowardly Dog. I'm so excited to talk to him, learn more about his career. It's going to be so much fun. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.